There is a quiet tragedy that happens to almost every human being. No one announces it. Nothing appears to break. We simply wake up one day and realize that we have become adults. We know how to calculate a salary, measure success, organize a schedule, and explain why certain dreams are impractical. But somewhere along the way, many of us lose the ability to see what once felt obvious. We know the price of things, but not always their value. We look at the sky, but no longer notice the stars. We meet people and ask what they do before wondering who they are. And perhaps no book has explored this invisible loss more beautifully than The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. On the surface, it is the story of a small golden-haired boy who leaves his tiny planet, travels through the universe, and eventually arrives on Earth. But beneath its simple language lies a profound examination of love, loneliness, imagination, responsibility, grief, and the strange ways adulthood teaches us to mistake what is measurable for what is meaningful. The story begins with a pilot remembering his childhood. When he was 6 years old, he saw an image of a python swallowing an animal whole. Inspired, he drew what he believed was his first masterpiece, a giant snake that had swallowed an elephant. But every adult who saw the drawing called it a hat, so he tried again. This time, he drew the inside of the snake to make the elephant visible. The adults still did not understand. Instead, they advised him to stop drawing and focus on sensible subjects such as geography, history, mathematics, and grammar. And so, at the age of 6, a possible artist disappeared. The child did not lose his imagination because it was weak. He learned to hide it because the people around him could no longer recognize it. Years later, he becomes a pilot. He travels across the world and learns how to speak the language. Adults respect numbers, positions, facts, and practical concerns. Then, one day, his aircraft crashes in the Sahara Desert. He is completely alone, thousands of miles from human help, with only enough water to survive for a few days. The desert is silent. The machine is broken. Death feels close. And then, at sunrise, a small voice wakes him. "Please draw me a sheep." Standing in the middle of the desert is a mysterious young boy. He appears neither frightened nor lost. He does not ask about the damaged plane. He simply wants a sheep. The pilot draws several, but the boy rejects each one. One is sick. Another is too old. Another is not really a sheep at all. Finally, frustrated, the pilot draws a box and says that the sheep is inside it. The little prince immediately smiles. It is exactly the sheep he wanted. This moment establishes the first great idea of the book. What is invisible is not necessarily unreal. The pilot and the child understand one another because both can see beyond the surface. What is invisible is not necessarily unreal. The pilot and the child see beyond the surface. One sees a sheep inside a box. The other remembers an elephant inside a snake. Slowly, the pilot learns that the boy comes from a tiny asteroid known as B612. His planet is so small that he can watch multiple sunsets simply by moving his chair. There are 3 volcanoes, including one that may no longer be active. There are dangerous baobab trees whose roots must be removed before they grow large, enough to destroy the planet. And there is one extraordinary rose. The baobabs are more than plants. They represent the small dangers we ignore until they become too powerful to control. A destructive habit, an unspoken resentment, a lie repeatedly postponed, a wound we refuse to examine. The book quietly suggests that caring for one's inner world requires daily attention. Not every disaster begins dramatically. Some begin as tiny seeds, but the rose becomes the emotional center of the little prince's life. She arrives slowly, carefully preparing herself before she blooms. She is beautiful, proud, fragile, demanding, theatrical, and afraid of revealing how vulnerable she truly is. The little prince loves her. He waters her, protects her beneath a glass dome. But he is too young to understand the language of imperfect love. The rose says things she does not fully mean. She hides affection behind pride. She asks for protection, then pretends she is not afraid. The little prince takes her words literally and becomes confused. Instead of judging her by the love visible in her actions, he becomes hurt by the contradictions in her speech. Eventually, he decides to leave. This is one of the most human parts of the story. Many relationships do not end because love was absent. They end because love was misunderstood. We listen to someone's defensive words, but fail to recognize the fear beneath them. We notice the difficulty of loving them, but overlook the tenderness they do not know how to express. The little prince later realizes that he should have judged the rose by her fragrance, her beauty, and the life she brought to his planet, not merely by what she said. But understanding often arrives after distance. Before leaving, he cleans his volcanoes and removes the final baobab shoots. The rose, for once, drops her pride. She tells him she loves him. She refuses the glass dome and accepts the wind, the cold, and even the possibility of caterpillars, because butterflies require them. It is a brief moment of honesty, but it arrives too late to stop his departure. The little prince begins traveling across a series of small planets. Each one is occupied by a single adult, and each adult is trapped inside one obsession. The first is a king. He rules an empty planet and wants everything to obey him, because he cannot tolerate disobedience. He gives only commands that circumstances are already certain to fulfill. He calls this wisdom, but his authority is an illusion. He does not serve anyone. He simply needs to feel powerful. The king represents the adult hunger for control, the belief that importance comes from being obeyed rather than being useful. The next planet belongs to a vain man. He hears every sound as applause. He sees every visitor as an admirer. He does not want connection. He wants confirmation, but praise can never satisfy someone whose worth depends entirely upon receiving more of it. The third planet belongs to a drinker. He drinks because he feels ashamed, and he feels ashamed because he drinks. The scene is brief, but psychologically devastating. He has created a circle in which the behavior used to escape pain produces more of the same pain. Then comes the businessman. He spends his life counting stars. He claims that he owns them because no one thought of owning them before him. He records their number and stores the paper in a drawer, but he never looks at their beauty. He does not guide travelers with their light. He does not care for them. He simply possesses them in theory. The little prince asks a simple but radical question. The businessman resembles a world in which people accumulate more than they can experience. Money without rest, followers without friendship, property without belonging, information without wonder. After him comes the lamplighter. His planet rotates so quickly that he must light and extinguish his lamp every minute. He is exhausted, but he continues because those are the rules. The little prince respects him more than the others because his work is not entirely self-centered. Still, the lamplighter is trapped inside a routine whose original purpose has disappeared. He represents people who continue performing duties long after those duties have stopped serving life. Finally, the little prince meets a geographer. The geographer writes enormous books about mountains, rivers, and oceans, but never leaves his desk. He depends on explorers to tell him what exists. He knows the map, but has never walked the land. He explains that flowers are not recorded because they are ephemeral, temporary things that may disappear. For the first time, the little prince realizes that his rose is fragile and may not exist forever. He left her alone, and now he understands that love makes vulnerability unavoidable. The geographer advises him to visit Earth, and so the little prince begins the journey that will transform everything. He thought he knew. When the little prince arrives on Earth, he does not land in a city. He lands in the desert. The emptiness makes the planet seem almost uninhabited. There, he meets a golden snake. The snake speaks in riddles and claims that although he appears weak, he has the power to send anyone he touches back to the place from which they came. This conversation feels mysterious when it first appears. Only near the end do we understand that the snake represents a passage, death, transformation, departure, and perhaps the return from one form of existence to another. The little prince then crosses the desert and mountains, expecting the earth to answer him. But when he calls out, he hears only his own echo. He mistakes repetition for conversation. It is another subtle picture of loneliness, speaking into a world that returns our words, but not our meaning. Then he discovers a garden filled with roses, thousands of them, all resembling the flower on his own planet. He is devastated. His rose had told him that she was unique in the universe. Now he sees that she appears ordinary. He had imagined himself rich because he possessed one exceptional flower. Suddenly, he believes that he owns nothing more than a common rose and 3 small volcanoes. He lies in the grass and cries. This is the moment in which his first, immature understanding of love collapses. He believed that uniqueness existed before relationship. He thought his rose mattered because no other flower resembled her. But then he meets the fox. The fox asks the little prince to tame him. The word does not mean control. It means to establish ties, to transform a stranger into someone irreplaceable. At first, the fox explains, the little prince is merely one boy among thousands of boys, and the fox is merely one fox among thousands of foxes. But if they create a bond, each will become unique to the other. The fox teaches him that relationships require ritual, patience, time, and consistency. The little prince must sit at a distance. He must return at the same hour. He must allow trust to grow gradually. This is the opposite of the modern desire for instant connection. The book understands that intimacy cannot be demanded. It is built through attention, through repetition, through the willingness to remain present before certainty exists. As their bond deepens, the fox explains how the world itself changes through love. He does not eat wheat, so wheat fields once meant nothing to him. But the little prince's hair is the color of golden wheat. After their friendship, every wheat field will remind the fox of him. The wheat has not physically changed. Its meaning has. This is what relationships do. They transform ordinary places, songs, seasons, scents, and objects into vessels of memory. A street becomes important because someone walked beside us there. A song becomes painful because it belonged to a particular time. A chair becomes sacred because someone once sat in it. Love reorganizes the emotional geography of the world. When it is time for the little prince to leave, the fox knows he will suffer. The prince asks why the fox wanted to be tamed if separation would bring pain. The fox responds that the color of the wheat will remain. In other words, grief does not prove that love was a mistake. Pain is sometimes the cost of having allowed life to become meaningful. Before they separate, the fox gives him the book's most famous truth. What is essential is invisible to the eye. This does not mean that reason is useless or that physical reality does not matter. It means that value cannot always be observed, counted, photographed, or measured. You can record a person's age, income, height, education, and social status. But none of those facts can explain why their presence makes another human being feel safe. You can calculate the price of a house. You cannot calculate the value of the memories created inside it. You can count the petals of a rose. You cannot measure why one rose carries the emotional weight of an entire universe. The little prince returns to the rose garden. The flowers still look like his rose, but now he understands that they are not equal to her. His rose became unique because of the time he spent caring for her, because he watered her, protected her, listened to her, worried about her. Love did not begin with discovering something objectively rare. Love made something irreplaceable. The fox gives him another lesson. You become responsible, forever, for what you have tamed. Love is not only an emotion. It creates obligation, to care, to remember, to remain attentive. The little prince continues his journey and meets a railway switchman, who sends trains rushing in different directions. The passengers do not know what they are seeking. Only children press their faces against the windows with genuine curiosity. He then meets a merchant who sells pills designed to eliminate thirst, saving 53 minutes a week. The little prince responds that if he had 53 free minutes, he would walk slowly toward a fountain. This small exchange captures the book's critique of efficiency without meaning. Adults often invent ways to save time, then fill the saved time with more activity. The little prince would use the time to experience something real. Meanwhile, the pilot is still struggling to repair his aircraft. His water supply runs out. Together, he and the little prince walk through the desert, searching for a well. The landscape appears empty, yet the child says that the desert is beautiful because somewhere it hides a well. This is one of the book's most important ideas. Beauty often comes from hidden possibility. A house may be valuable because it carries a secret memory. A person may appear ordinary, but contain an unseen history. A silent desert may be beautiful because water exists beneath it. Eventually, they find a well unlike anything that should exist in such a place. They draw water together. The water becomes more than a drink. It carries the meaning of the stars, the effort of walking, the sound of the rope, and the work of their hands. It is valuable because of the journey that led to it. The little prince then asks the pilot to draw a muzzle for the sheep. He worries that the sheep may eat his rose. This detail matters because love has now become responsibility. It is no longer only remembrance. He must protect what he has learned to value. But the pilot unknowingly forgets to draw the leather strap that would hold the muzzle in place. This small omission leaves a question that will haunt the ending. The little prince has now been on Earth for nearly a year. He returns to the place where he first arrived, the desert beside an old stone wall. There the golden snake waits. The pilot realizes that the little prince has arranged his departure. The child explains that his planet is too far away. His body is too heavy to carry there. What will happen may appear frightening. It may look as though he has died. But he tells the pilot not to believe appearances. The body, he says, is only an old shell. The person within it will be traveling home. The pilot is heartbroken. The little prince comforts him by promising that whenever he looks at the stars, one of them will contain his laughter. For other people, the stars are silent lights. For the pilot, they will become 500 million bells. That night, the little prince walks toward the snake. The snake strikes near his ankle. He falls quietly into the sand. There is no scream, no dramatic struggle, only silence. The following morning, his body is gone. The book never tells us precisely what happened. Did he die? Did he return to B612? Is this a spiritual transformation, a child's interpretation of death, or a poetic refusal to separate love from continued presence? The ambiguity is deliberate, because some experiences cannot be reduced to a single explanation without losing what makes them meaningful. Years later, the pilot continues looking at the stars. Sometimes he feels comforted. Sometimes he worries. Did the sheep eat the rose? Is the rose still protected? This question may appear small, but the narrator insists that the answer changes the entire universe. If the rose lives, the stars shine differently. If she is gone, everything is altered. Adults may dismiss the question because it cannot be measured or proven. But the book asks us to understand that what matters deeply to one person can transform the meaning of the whole world. The Little Prince is often described as a children's book, but it is really a warning addressed to adults. It does not ask us to reject maturity. It asks us to mature without becoming emotionally blind, to become intelligent without becoming cynical, successful without becoming empty, responsible without becoming mechanical. It does not tell us to abandon numbers, facts, work, or practical life. It asks us not to confuse those things with the whole of existence. The Little Prince's journey teaches us that control is not love, possession is not relationship, praise is not self-worth, routine is not purpose, knowledge is not experience, and appearance is not essence. The rose teaches that love can be imperfect and still be real. The fox teaches that time and care create uniqueness. The desert teaches that what appears empty may contain hidden life. The stars teach that absence does not erase relationship, and the pilot teaches us that the child we once were may disappear from public view, but does not have to die inside us. Perhaps growing older was never the tragedy. Perhaps the tragedy was learning to call wonder foolish, to call tenderness weakness, to call imagination useless, to call only measurable things real. The Little Prince leaves us with a question that is both gentle and severe. What have you stopped seeing because the world taught you to look only with your eyes? Maybe the person you used to be is not gone. Maybe that child is still waiting. Inside a forgotten drawing, inside a distant star, inside a rose you once loved, or inside the part of you that still believes a sheep can live inside a box. Read deeply, look carefully, and remember, the most important things in life may never be visible, but they are often the only things that make life worth living.